Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dan Assard, and welcome to the presentation of the Vermont Funeral Directors Association that they've asked us to conduct on the relationship between pricing and overhead. As we deal with the issues of serving families during a pandemic, before and after, nothing is going to be more difficult than establishing the right pricing. And that's what I'm going to address with you today. If you're not familiar with my company, it was founded in 1987. We've served more than 3,000 funeral homes, about 800 cemeteries in transactional matters, accounting matters, finance, operational, management, HR, just about anything. As far as me, I've been around this business now for 35 years, and I'm flattered that you guys have kept me around this long. During that time, I've been evaluator and owner and operator of funeral homes throughout the United States, a consultant, and helped lead my company to the position that we have today, that we wish to protect for the future. I'm very flattered that this is the third event that I'm doing for the Vermont Funeral Directors Association. Your association is one of the more unique state associations, and it's because of your size, the blend of most of you being rural and a few urban, and those damn Yankees that you serve. I don't mean the baseball team. I mean the mentality. So with that being said, I'm going to take you through this in this webinar. Now, if you've not participated in a webinar before, be aware that there are certain protocols. You're muted right now, so if you talk, cough, or the phone rings, nobody can hear it. If you do have a question, we're going to show you how to pose that question during the presentation. And at the end, I've left some time for questions. We will get you a copy of the slides that are on your screen today, so that way you can use it for your reference. We'll also send you a link to this webinar. We are recording it, so you will have the ability to share it with friends, show it to employees, colleagues, business partners, and if you're like me, when you forget something, you'll be able to bring up the video and use that to help with your recall. If you have a question as we go along, Nicole Vullo, who is my marketing director, is monitoring this. And Nicole, if she thinks it's a timely question, she'll interrupt. In the event it's a question that she wants us to get at the end, then she'll introduce that question to me at the end. But by going to your screen, you can go into your Zoom controls and you'll see Q&A. Click on the Q&A and you can type a question. In the event you have questions that are more personal, you'll have my email address and you can send them to me personally, or if you're old school like me, pick up the phone, call me. I'm happy to talk with you. The methodology that I'm going to deal with is a blend of lecture, sharing, and Q&A. I'm going to work through an exact pricing analysis for you. Now, these are going to be done as an example. This is not trying to get you to influence everyone in Vermont to price the exact same dollars. The same way, yes, but the dollars, no. We are not trying to fix prices. In the event you're hoping that this is a seminar on how to fix prices, you can leave now. The information is going to be communicated to you because we as a company, and I in my 35 years, have dealt with tens of thousands of consumer issues on consumer family follow-up surveys, as well as reading the work of national organizations, whether it's the NFDA, the Worthland Group, which was sponsored by FAMIC, the Funeral and Memorial Group, as well as other invitation associations. And along the way, I've tried a lot of things with my clients. Most of them have worked. Some of them have failed. And then we did a dissection of why they failed. So that's what I'm going to take you through today. Now, at the end of this, I told you we're going to send you the link to the webinar and a copy of these slides. We're also going to send you a survey. If you complete that survey, I'm going to send you something that could be worth as much as $5,000 to $10,000. That's not sarcasm. I'm going to send you an Excel spreadsheet that we've updated, that we sent to the Vermont Association several years ago when I did another pricing webinar for you. And you're going to get a video that's going to show you how to use it. I'm not trying to sell you on retaining me. I'm trying to sell you on getting it right. If you need help, great. But if I could show you how to do it yourself, all the better. So complete the survey. You'll get this video on how to use the Excel spreadsheet and the Excel spreadsheet for you to be able to do yourself. Trust me, it's going to save you 20 or 30 hours of your time. So to understand pricing, what I've learned is it's a blend of math, it's a blend of logic, and it's a blending of salesmanship. And every time I work with one of the hundreds of clients of our firm on adjusting their pricing for the very first time to the right price, I find that I have to sell you so that way you can then have comfort when explaining your pricing to your staff and your families. As the great philosopher Pogo has said, we have met the enemy and he is us. The number one reason why your pricing is wrong is because screwed it up. So my objectives today are to go over the history of funeral pricing. Some of you are old enough to remember some of the historical points I'm going to mention and show you how to understand overhead. I guarantee you that most of you don't look at overhead the same way I do. I want you to understand calls and the utilization of your services, the balance between merchandise and service fees, the objective of setting prices, how to set up your GPL, and how to handle objections. So let me take you back a couple years. I came into funeral service in 1984. It happened to be the year of the Federal Trade Commission investigation into funeral pricing, which they later memorialized into what we now call the funeral rule. So we had pre-1985 and we have post-1985. In order to understand how we got so screwed up, you need to understand that prior to 1985, there was no federal regulation. 95% of all deaths resulted in a casketed call. And when a consumer bought the casket, what did they get? They got everything. They got the casket removal, all administrative services, the body prep, the visitation, and the service and the staff, either in your chapel or in a church. You paid one price. And we called this a merchandise model. In a business school, analysis, this is a merchandise model. You buy the merchandise, you get all the service. For example, if you've ever bought jewelry, they don't say to you, oh, it's this much for the ring, and did you want a box? Did you want tissue paper in the box? Do you want the box in a bag? Do you want more tissue paper in the bag? Oh, do you want an appraisal? Oh, do you want me to clean the ring before I put it in the box? You just buy the ring. But that was funeral service pre-1985. The funeral rule instituted by the Federal Trade Commission changed everything. Now, funeral homes had to comply and have a general price list, a casket price list, and an outer burial container price list. We went from a merchandise model to a service and merchandise model, by which you pay for the merchandise and itemized services. Now, in funeral service, we were losing the battle with the Federal Trade Commission. The funeral haters were winning until Howard Rather, the then executive director of NFDA, came up with a Hail Mary, a 12-hour offering called the basic non-declinable. He explained to the 23-year-old policy wanks at the FTC that a funeral home, regardless of the type of service a family picks, needs to have certain overhead. For example, it needs to have a building you bring the body to. You need to have staff to handle the paperwork, regardless of what someone buys. You need to have cars, regardless of whether the body is being driven to the funeral home, to the crematory, or to an airport. There was general overhead, regardless of how that body was going to be handled. And the FTC said, yeah, you're right. And Rather's point was we need to have one fee, a basic non-declinable fee, regardless of what families chose. And the FTC incorporated that into the funeral rule. We won. And then, like funeral directors always do, we shot ourselves in the foot. We suddenly went from having a basic non-declinable that applies to every family, no matter whether the body is buried, cremated, donated to science, whatever. And we suddenly started saying, ooh, I need to change that. And we did. We screwed up what we were given. We do have fees for removal, all administrative fees, body prep, visitation, service, and staff, whether it's in your chapel or at a third party. And we basically guessed at how to allocate these service fees in 1985. Therefore, post-1985, we were dealing with some dollar amount for these items, and we found that it became a problem. The basic non-declinable is the one fee that all families pay, all, to cover the costs that are necessary to service all families, regardless of the type of service they choose. Now, there are those of you that will say, well, Dan, it takes less effort to serve a cremation family than it does a burial family. Wrong. If you write down the steps it takes for you to handle a direct burial, I guarantee you there are more steps to handle a direct cremation. Because at the very least, there's one more step, which is returning the cremated remains. If you go through the steps for having a serviced body that's going to be casketed and buried versus a cremation following a service, there is one more step on the cremation service. So if it's the same amount of tasks, why wouldn't the pricing be the same? If the basic non-declinable is in fact truly the basic non-declinable, why isn't the basic non-declinable charged in every case of a cremated body? Because we think the families don't want to pay it. We shoot ourselves in the foot. So we need to understand that we as a profession have to begin respecting the basic non-declinable. Now, you still need to sell merchandise when merchandise is desired. And you need to figure out what the markup needs to be on that merchandise. You guessed at a price for the basic non-declinable, the removal, body prep, visitation, etc. And you guessed at a price on the cremation. Or maybe you treat cremations like a cash advance. Now, if you do, let me ask you this question. If you hire a trade service to do a removal for you, do you have a removal fee that is equal to or greater than that trade service? Of course you do. So why would you mark up a trade removal or a trade embalming, but not mark up a trade service providing cremation services for you? I'm not even going to pause the webinar for you to ponder that. Somewhere along the line, you got this into your head. Maybe it came from dad and you took over the business. Maybe it came from someone else. I don't know. But purge that from your head from this day forward and have confidence in it. It makes sense on a burial family. Why shouldn't it make sense for a cremation family? Now, let me lead you through 7 conclusions that I've studied that are absolutes, and I've seen them year in and year out. First thing that I've learned is that when we set our prices, what we do is we use the mathematical formula on the screen in front of you. $X times WIR equals WP small r to the 35th degree. So you started with a dollar amount on your service fee, which was W, wrong. And you compounded that by some wild ass guess percentage each year since 1985. So the wrong amount compounded by the wrong amount is going to equal what? The wrong amount. And therefore, we're shooting ourselves in the foot. In 1985, 95% of your families were buying merchandise from you, a casket, typically a vault. But what's happened since 1985? The quantity of families buying merchandise is going down. And therefore, you're more reliant upon your service fee than ever before. So we have to understand that if families are buying less and less merchandise, there's more reliance upon your service fees, and you've got to set your service fees accurately. The price of merchandise did not keep up with the inflationary increase. Do you understand that your payroll costs have gone up dramatically at a greater than your merchandise, even though you're selling less merchandise each year? So we have a discombobulation, that's a Latin term, whereby you keep the markup on your merchandise and you're not selling the same level of merchandise. Direct cremation has been increasing. I've studied this. I don't care whether we're in Vermont, Arizona, New Zealand. The number of bodies cremated in 1985 were this many. The number of bodies choosing to be cremated now are dramatically increased. You're at about a 70% rate or higher in the state of Vermont. The national average today is over 55%. But the problem is you don't understand why people cremate bodies. You don't understand what their motivation is. You're probably thinking it's price, and it's not. Nothing about anything I'm talking about today deals with price, except for the very, very minority quantity of consumers. Generally less than 20%, 11% nationwide. You altered your pricing predicated upon fear and no mathematics. You think that because a competitor is priced at X, you need to match their price. My Polish grandmother would say to me, Denia, Denia, as she'd pinch my cheek to get my attention. If all the other boys in the neighborhood jumped off the bridge, would you jump with them? Now, I was a wise ass. I would ask, which bridge? But you change your prices because of your competitor, yet you think your competitor is an idiot. I've learned in this business, the difference between a competitor and a colleague is if the son of a gun is in the room. So, ladies and gentlemen, you altered your prices predicated upon fear and no math. And that is a problem. Your overhead is increased by a rate that is far more than your service fees have increased. And therefore, when overhead increases at a rate greater than your service fees are increasing, there's only one thing that can give, and that's profit. And the chart on your screen shows that in 1986, the average funeral home, according to Federated Funeral Directors, had a profit margin of almost 15%. And yet today, that profit margin is closer to 7%. Why? We did it to ourselves. And I can tell you, pre-need, which is an important part of your business model, pre-need has given up a lot of your profit. What you see here is the blue bar on the chart on your screen is the amount of pre-need crediting. And in 1986, pre-need insurance companies and trust companies were giving an 8% yield when the indigenous inflation rate of owning a funeral home went up 6%. You actually had pre-need refunds. And that continued until 2006. And look what happened every year since then. So for the last 14 years, your internal cost of operation have gone up at a rate far greater than the pre-need trusts and the pre-need insurance companies are able to credit on those accounts. Yet, you've guaranteed. You've said to the family, if you prearrange, I'll guarantee that the price will cover whatever that expense is. And once again, when there's a shortfall, there's only one thing that can make up that difference: profit. Now, my objective is to make you uncomfortable, because that's the only way to get you to do what I need you to do, and I need you to survive. And therefore, let me show you how to compute your pricing, and we start with overhead. Most of you figure you understand what overhead is, but you don't. Overhead is really two things. It's the operating cost of your business, which is paying everything, and it's your financial overhead. Now, please keep in mind the disclaimer. I'm one of few people that has ever been sued by attorney generals of many states because my haters have said that I'm teaching funeral directors how to fix prices. I am not teaching you how to fix prices. I'm trying to teach you how to set your individual business price. I'm going to show you mathematical examples to educate you and how to perform the math. I'm going to give you an Excel spreadsheet if you take a moment to complete the survey that will help you do the math. So the examples I'm going to go through are not your numbers. They're just an example. This is not an attempt to fix prices. So we have two forms of overhead: operational overhead plus financial overhead. For example, operational overhead, and this is an actual case, staff cost about $175,000, livery $20,000, other funeral costs, which is your cost for fluids, embalming, PPEs, variable facility costs, repairs, maintenance, utilities, advertising, which is all your costs of marketing, at need and pre-need, G&A, general and administrative. This is your internal office cost, and your fixed facilities cost. This is the rent, the insurance for operating out of your business. This business that I'm going to use as an example has an overhead of about $370,000, but that's the operating overhead. There's another form of overhead, financial overhead. The principal that you pay on your notes. And many of you do have notes, either for automobiles, repairs. Excuse me, some of you have notes for the acquisition of your business. The interest expense, the non-deductible cost of operations. It used to be meals were 100% deductible. They are not anymore. You need to build cash in your business from time to time, especially during a pandemic. Your capital assets need to be replaced. Now, you'll be able to take depreciation against them, but you got to buy them first. So you need to have the cash to buy those assets. And this is going to be radical: profit. You're entitled to a minimum profit. Imagine, if you will, a stockbroker called you up on the phone and said, "Hey, client, I got a great tip on a company that's going to go wild. They're fabulous. The only thing I want you to know about them is that they set their prices, but they do not anticipate a minimum profit. How many shares of that company are you going to want to buy? But I imagine most of you on this call that are business owners, you've got a hell of a lot of money invested in a company just like that. It's not your stockbroker's fault. And the last thing I want you to understand is you need money for taxes. If you're going to have a profit, you got to pay for the tax on that profit. So in this particular case, the company had $371,000 of operating overhead, but by my guesstimate, they have about $150,000 of financial overhead. Now, the question that some people raise is, how do you determine what that minimum profit would be? Well, if I said to you, I want you to invest in a little bit of a risky business, something you control, but it's still a little risky, what's the return you would expect to have? And if, in fact, you say that number is 5%, well, figure out what the value of your business is and factor in a 5% minimum profit. If you don't know what the value of your business is, well, I do know someone who's valued more than 3,000 funeral homes and is very, very good at what they do and modest. So you can hire them to help you with that. But the bottom line is you are entitled to a profit, in my opinion. So this business doesn't have $371,000 of overhead. It actually has to generate $519,000 of actual overhead. That's the boogeyman. Every time you try to set prices, start with your overhead. Now, the first place you're going to recover anything is on the merchandise side. Now, we all know that there's a merchandise profit. Now, the question is, how much should that profit be? Because whatever I don't get on the merchandise, I have to get on the service fee. So there's a teeter-totter, there's a yin and a yang. And once we figure that out, now we can set the service fees. So in the event you say, I want to get this much of my overhead returned from my merchandise, we can figure that out. And we could figure that out effectively. But you get to play that game of where you're going to set your merchandise. Now, that markup on merchandise could be selling your merchandise at cost. If a casket costs you $1,000 and you sell it for 100% of cost, you're selling that casket for $1,000. How much profit do you have on that casket? Zero. Now, I'm saying casket, it would be the same for vaults, it would be the same for merchandise, jewelry, paper goods, markers if you're selling those. If you mark up your merchandise to 150%, that means you're selling your merchandise for $1,500 that cost you $1,000. What some people in this business would call a 1.5. The reality is it's a 0.5. At 200% of cost, that's $2,000. At 250% of cost, that's $2,500. Could it be more than that? Yes. But understand the future. What's going to happen in the future? Are you going to be selling more caskets or less? And keep in mind, every time you don't sell a casket, you don't sell a vault. So for example, I like to see a 200% markup. So you sell a $1,000 casket for $2,000. It's not because of the online world. It's not because Costco and all these other companies are selling caskets. It's because the reality is, in my experience, you need to make your money on service fees, not on merchandise. Dad and granddad, they can mark up the caskets 5 and 6 times and not have a problem. But you have to do it in the way we're doing it in the 21st century. So if you did mark up your merchandise 100% over cost, then in this particular example, and your Excel spreadsheet will give you the ability to play the examples on that, you'll be able to force yourself to get $230,000 from profit from merchandise, and then you have to figure out what your allocation needs to be from your service fees to generate $434,000. So the type of calls, doesn't matter? Of course it matters. But what we're seeing is that this is fluid. In 1985, 95% of your calls were casketed. Today, what? 30%? 20%? Less? Shipping and trade. Vermont doesn't have a lot of that unless you're in a couple of the larger towns. The facility is a big thing. How many of your families are no longer using your facilities? Well, since March 12th, the official advent date of this pandemic, what have we seen? Families are using your facilities less and less. Now, January 1st last year, let's assume you changed your prices. January 1st of 2020, let's say. As you saw this pandemic rage, and by April or May, you found families either were not allowed to congregate or they were self-electing not to congregate. Your overhead didn't change, but your profit areas did. Therefore, you have the right to change how you emphasize your service fees. Every client that we influenced, we told them, drop your gathering fees, your facility fees. Increase your basic non-declinable, the removal, the transfer to. We've seen what's happening in a pandemic. And don't think because the inoculations are coming out that this year is going to be different. It won't. First of all, we're not going to have everyone inoculated probably until the end of this year. Secondly, do you have any parents or grandparents that survived the Depression? People that survived the Depression, the stock market crash of 1929, the economic turmoil that this country went in for 3 to 5 years before being rejuvenated by a world war. Ladies and gentlemen, that stink never leaves. The mentality of my parents and grandparents, and I'm sure yours, were always conservative from that day forward. They all knew how hunger felt. And they all knew the fear. So don't expect that this is going to change. Families are going to be desiring less use of your facilities. And therefore, according to our consumer study, and I urge you to go on our website and spend 1 hour of your life to view the webinar on our 2020 consumer study. Studies are showing that consumers nationwide want more technology in your funeral home, so that way families can participate and arrange funerals that are more inclusive over longer distances without the fear of coming together. So why do families choose cremation? This is the easiest question in the world. And as I said earlier, it's not price. It's because they want cremation. They want it. Now, they may want it for reasons that you don't want them to want it for. But if you own a steak restaurant and you see a bunch of vegetarians move into your community and the beef eaters move out, what would you do? You'd change your menu. When we look at the type of calls families are choosing, we have to understand there are some things that they are not opting out of. They're not opting out of the basic non-declinable because they can't. You may screw it up, but they are not opting out of it. They don't opt out of a removal. Trust me on this. There are some things even Uber won't do. The transfer of a body to the crematory or to the cemetery or to the airport, Uber and Lyft won't do it. So if you look at the quantity of calls, and again, this is an example, but this is a real example. Here's a small 90-call funeral home, and what do we see with the casketed calls? They're going down. The non-casketed calls are going up. So when we look at the quantity of calls, we look at an average. We also look at what we call pro forma. Pro forma is advisor speak for wild ass guess. So we make a guess about the future. And now the last thing I want you to understand is we make a calculation for pricing that is 90% of the pro forma. Why 90%? Because Babe Ruth didn't expect to hit a home run every single time he came at bat. At 90%, you're safe. If you cover your overhead with 90% of your cases, you're fine. In my experience over 35 years and working with over 3,000 funeral homes, 1 out of every 5 years is a superior case count year. 1 out of every 5 years is an inferior case count year. Ironically, those 2 years often go side by side. And that's in non-pandemic years. The other 3 out of 5 are average. I can't tell you in advance which is going to be which. So why guess? Be conservative. Meet your overhead with 90%. So if we have $500,000, $520,000 of total overhead, a $72,000 profit from merchandise, we're trying to get $447,000 from service fees. And therefore, the assumed cases, 90% of the assumed cases, means I have to recover $5,346 a case. That's my overhead. Therefore, that's what I have to recover from service fees. Now, what do you do if you can't generate that average service fee per call? Well, in the short term, look to cut overhead. The single largest cost of operating a funeral home is staffing. I'm not encouraging you to fire people, but I'm telling you, if it's either lay someone off or cut back their hours or convert them from full-time to part-time, or maybe 2 funeral homes hire support staff and share their hours, rather than shutting down, that's a good alternative. Reduce your profit expectations. Maybe it's not going to be 5% or 10% of the value. Maybe it's going to be 2%. Maybe you try raising your merchandise markup. Or maybe you do, as a lot of you did when you were younger, you get a job working for another funeral home while you try to build your funeral home. I know you say I'm too old for that. I got it. I understand. I'm old. But it's either that or fail. Now, long term, maybe you look at selling. Maybe you look to merge with another funeral home. Think about this. How many towns in Vermont have one McDonald's? The hamburger joint. How many towns in Vermont have one McDonald's? Why doesn't every town in Vermont have a McDonald's? Because not every town in Vermont has enough population to maintain a McDonald's. Now, if your town has one McDonald's but 3 funeral homes, what does that tell you? If your town has no McDonald's and 2 funeral homes, what does that tell you? Now, I can allocate how to lay out the service fees, but I want to focus on what calls are increasing. And I'm going to send you these slides. I'm not going to take the time now to labor through each and every line. But if this is where we are, it's an example. And these are the key pricing points that generate the largest amount of revenue from your general price list. So if you look at what you're doing, and then this Excel spreadsheet does this for you that I'm encouraging you to get from me for free, look at the number of times that each of these are going to take place, and that's going to generate so much revenue. So for example, if I'm basing this on 80 calls and your current GPL has $2,095 as your basic non-declinable, that's going to generate $167,000. If I make assumptions about each of these items and how frequently they're going to be used, times your current price, that gives me an idea of where you're going to be. Now, if I'm trying to come up with pricing for a business at about $460,000, and I look at this Excel spreadsheet and it tells me I'm only going to generate $340 from service fees, I'm $122,000 short. So do I just click my heels 3 times and say, well, that's the way it is? Well, the only way to do that is if you have a very good friend who's a bankruptcy lawyer, because you're going to spend a lot of time with them. Why is it so difficult to set prices the way it should? Because you're afraid that if you set your prices where they need to be, families won't come to you. You're being adversely influenced by competition. Some of you just don't know what the cost is of doing business because you're a caregiver. That's not a put down. That's the greatest compliment I can give you. And for many of you, you are so dedicated to your local communities that you want to serve the families. You believe that you give better care than your competitor. So therefore, you're willing to subsidize each family. That's a problem. So when we look at this pricing, if you're going to wind up with a $120,000 shortfall and you say, okay, Dan, I get it. I want to be doing this right. What do you subsidize? Well, do you assume I won't do 90% of my cases? I'll do 100%? All you're doing then is taking risk. What you need to do is change your general price list. And this Excel spreadsheet will take you through that. Again, I'm giving you this Excel spreadsheet. All you're giving me is your feedback following this webinar. So if we go from a change, we'll come up with the proper itemized pricing. And once we come up with the itemized pricing, then we can saddle on the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, mandated packages. There's a direct burial package. And to come up with that, it's just your basic, the removal, a care of a non-embalmed body, transportation to the cemetery, add them up. That's what it is. Now, don't say to me, oh, Dan, how much do I discount that? Why would you discount it? It's the minimum. The middle column is direct cremation. Some of you are going to say, I can't do $4,500 for a direct cremation. Well, of course you can. You just choose not to. But if the math isn't to your liking, change the overhead. You can't change your pricing without changing your overhead. Now, again, this is an example. This isn't trying to get you to fix your pricing to these numbers, but the methodology is what I want you to follow. As you look at pricing, the types of calls are critical. And the future, if you had to predict the future, is going to be what? More casketed or non-casketed? More shipping or trade? Some of you don't do a lot of that now. More facility or non-facility? More pre-need or at-need? Plan your pricing for the future, because your pricing is critical to have it right today, because that's what each one of your pre-needs that you're selling are being locked in at. And if your pricing is wrong today for your pre-needs, what do you think it's going to be when you have to service those pre-needs in the future? See, families choose cremation, and you're focused on that. Don't be. Focus on the fact that you want them to choose you, not cremation. We have to look at setting your prices for burial and cremation so that they're both carrying the weight. Now, prior to the national average on cremation going above 50%, many funeral directors said, I'll overprice burial so I can give a discount to cremation. Well, today we're above 50% cremation. Who are you going to tax to subsidize the majority? The big problem with cremation that I found is that you may not get it. Now, in 2020, on the right-hand side of this chart, funeral directors that were 65 or over, only 5% would choose cremation for themselves or a loved one. Those 55 to 65, in 2020, it was 15%. 45 to 55, it was about 20%. Today, of those funeral directors over age 65, we're up to 20%. Now, you might say that's a change. It is, but the reality is it's still a problem, because the average person over age 50 is at 62% choice of cremation. So to you, you don't get them. And that's one of the problems. When we look at the quantity of calls that you're dealing with, we have to recognize trends are setting in, and you have to be prepared to deal with them. So using 90%, you're going to come up with the right answer. Don't look at the 3-year average. Don't look at trend lines. The correct answer is 90% of the greater of your 3-year average or your trend line. Look at the quantity of calls. And again, this is an example. But have the strength to make these wise decisions. If in fact we're going to have the right number, you always look at your current pricing and how we're going to meet those needs. You'll then set your pricing for packages off of your itemized pricing. Set itemized first, then your package pricing. So we know, in wrapping up, that your merchandise markup should be modest. We know that in a pandemic, there's going to be less use of your facilities. We know that burial and cremation is a choice consumers are going to make, regardless of what you believe the right situation is. And if you have to, you can change prices more than once a year. So the last thing I'm going to cover, and then we'll open it up for questions, is number one, handling objections. Now, I can tell you, I'm a consultant. I'm in sales. I sell myself. You're in sales also. You sell yourself. You sell trust. You're basically making a promise to every family that today is Monday. Your loved one died. You don't know how you're going to get to Thursday. I promise I'm going to get you there. This is why the hugs at graveside are as deep and meaningful as they are, because that family just spent 3 or 4 days not sleeping, trusting you, and you got them to Thursday. So you are in sales. You're selling an intangible, just like I sell an intangible. And whenever I get an objection, I handle it 3 ways. Number one, I agree with someone. Number two, I probably ignore the premise. And then I explain calmly to them. For example, phone shoppers. Phone shoppers call up and say, how much is a direct cremation? And you say a dollar amount. Well, here's what I want you to do differently. First of all, I want you to smile. Smile at the phone. Then I want you to tell them your name. Hi, my name's Dan Assard. Have you ever been at our funeral home before? They're going to say one of 2 things, yes or no. If they say yes, okay, thank you for calling us. By the way, how long ago were you here? Do you remember the family that you came to support? Now, have a designated cremation expert. Do not let whoever answers the phone answer a question on direct cremation. You know, what I'd like to do, you're dealing with cremation. My designated expert is Nicole. Nicole, I'm going to get on the phone with us, and she, as an expert on the area of cremation, is going to be able to help you. And then Nicole is prepared to ask questions. Now, the one thing that is so critical is spending the time bonding with this person and finding out whether this is a price issue or they're shopping for a funeral home. If it's a price issue, tell them, have you made many phone calls yet? And if they haven't, now what you want to do is you want to say, look, let me save you a couple of phone calls. I can send you not only a written proposal from us on what we do, but I'm also going to send you the prices of 2 or 3 funeral homes in the region that can serve you. What is your zip code? And now, I'm sure you have the prices of your competitors. You send it to them. They aren't looking for price. They're looking for value. And when you buy an intangible, you don't buy the cheapest professional. You buy the one that gives you the feeling that you're getting value. If somebody says you're too expensive, compared to what? It's not about price, ladies and gentlemen. It's about value. And you're a professional, and therefore you need to have that value. So at this point in time, I'm going to open this up to questions. Nicole, if you want to come online and just feed those to me. If you do have a question, I urge you to go into the Zoom box. You could enter your question right in there. As I've said to you, we are going to have a survey going to you. I will send you the Excel spreadsheet and the video on how to use it for anyone who completes the survey. Nicole?
Yes. Hi, Dan. Okay, so we do have one question for you, and I have a couple others as well. So the first one is, Vermont has a relatively high per capita of direct disposition services. Can you speak to your thoughts regarding a funeral home structuring a very basic cremation service with restrictive guidelines at a reduced price? This as opposed to developing a completely separate entity outside the funeral home.
Yeah, what you're the question is trying to address is, should I create a another brand that just goes for the low price funeral home? You can't. You're going to be cannibalizing your own business. The only way you can copy a cremation society's pricing is to have their overhead. And one of the ways in which some of the better cremation societies have a low overhead is they deal with quantity. You cannot have a $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 a year employee doing an $800 cremation or whatever the dollar amount is. I'm not trying to set prices, obviously. But yours, study your families, figure out why they're coming to you. Figure out why they're not coming to you. We've done, in my lifetime, we've done family follow-up surveys for hundreds of funeral homes. And I've done another type of survey for only about 20 or 30. And that is where we survey your competitors' families. And one of the questions we ask a competitor's family survey is why they go to the competitor and not to you. And what you find is that not everyone in a town likes you or trusts you. Sometimes it's price, but that's on us because we as a profession do such a terrible job of explaining our value service. Do you have an aftercare program? Do you have other things that you're doing in your community that bring value? First of all, price shoppers are not pre-need shoppers. No one ever price shops a pre-need. I'd say no one, less than 5%. So therefore, write more pre-need, and these people will not be price shoppers. Secondly, market your service strengths. Think about the restaurants that you frequent and you go in and they know your name. You don't complain about their prices. You don't say, gee, a glass of iced tea here is $3 and at the diner across the street with the tables that wobble, their iced tea is only 95 cents. You go there because they make you feel good. Aftercare and other programs of community outreach do that for you. So don't start looking for ways to cut your own price, cut your own profit without cutting your overhead. If you can't cut your overhead, find ways to maximize your strengths.
Dan, we have another question for you. This question is, how do we best address price transparency given the complex design of the GPL?
Yeah, great question. First thing you need to know, if you go through our 2020 Consumer Attitude Survey, what we found is that not only did more than 70% of families want to see pricing, but 50 some odd percent, 52, 53% of all families said, I won't do business with a funeral home that does not have price transparency. Think about this, ladies and gentlemen. The first time you're trying to plan a trip, let's say you come to Phoenix. I know you got crappy weather now, and we have amazing weather, 80 degrees, sunshine, 40 miles of visibility. Your golf clubs can get use out here that they can't there. But you go on the website of the airline and you want to find out how much is a ticket to Phoenix tomorrow. And you answer all these questions on their website. What kind of seat do you want? What time of day do you want to go? Do you need hotel? Do you want a meal? How many bags are you going to check? And then you hit enter, and that website says, thank you. Come to our airport location and we'll tell you what the price is. Well, that's what most of you do on your website. You don't answer the question. Quite frankly, planning a funeral is not difficult. It's a decision tree. First question on the decision tree deals with, is the ultimate disposition of the body going to be through cremation or through burial? Let's assume it's cremation. Now you ask the second question. What time of day do you want to have a visitation? Third question, do you want the body present or not present during the visitation? Do you want a funeral service? Do you want it to be in our facility or an outside facility? It's not a difficult planning technique. We think it is, but it's not. And if you don't think that this is going to happen in the future, right now, the Federal Trade Commission is, when they come back together, ready to hold hearings on what? You putting your prices online. What do you think the odds are that they're going to come back and say, you need to? Yeah.
And Dan, we have one more question for you to answer. This one is, how do I put my complicated FTC mandated pricing online in a way that the consumer will understand and not drive the consumer away?
Great question. One of the things that we can do online today is just what we're doing today. We have video. The websites of 2010 did not have video. Memory was too expensive. So you know what you can do? You can hold up your phone and give video answers to questions that families probably want to know. And then take that video and attach it to your website and answer those questions for them. If you want something more professional, hire a high school kid in the video program at the high school. You remember the ones with the glasses and the pimples, like I was 50 years ago. And these kids will come in and capture this video and post it on your website for you. Families want these answers. You can give it to them, and you can give it to them better than any of the funeral haters, the Lisa Carlsons, the Joshua Slocums of the world can give. So, ladies and gentlemen, I strongly recommend that you get the information out before the haters get the information out. I think we've used up all of our time and then some. I appreciate very much you having me talk to you. I hope that I've influenced you for the better. We will be sending you a link to the video of this program, so that way you can refer to it as you need to, share it as you feel the need to. We will send you a copy of the slides. I will tell you, if you take the survey, it'll take 1 minute of your time. We will send you both the Excel and a second video that explains how to use this Excel program. I gave it to your state association once before, and Chris Palermo was kind enough to help me try to influence you before and again today. So I want to help you. I think your association and the group of you has probably one of the most difficult plights of any state association, and I want to help you. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for giving me an hour and 15 minutes of your time. And I hope that this helps. And I hope that you have nothing but profit problems into the future. Thank you for your service to mankind through this pandemic and showing funeral service in the great light. Call me if you have any questions. Thank you.